Tennessee PGA Assistant Executive Director Kyle Bachman, and Director of Golf at Vanderbilt Legends Club, Micah Hicks.
Good morning, everyone. So, thank you so much for coming out to our little education seminar. We had a lot of fun talking about different things that people might want to hear, and a couple of the ones that we've talked about are things that maybe we had brought up in the past but haven't talked about in a while. And I'll kind of give you a brief summary of how this particular seminar came about. So my name is Micah Hicks. I'm the Director of Golf at Vanderbilt Legends Club here in Franklin. Our club is a private 36-hole club. We have multiple events that we do during the year. I was trying to calculate with my head pro cast and my assistant Jesse Grimes roughly how many competitions we ran during the year. So a competition could be anything from a Midsummer Guest, Club Championship, Ladies' Day, Couples Twilight, Masters Par 3 tournament, Mason Rudolph Championship that we do with Vanderbilt University. All the way up to this past year, we were able to land the Korn Ferry Tour Finals event, which is how I met Mr. Hearn here. And we figured that we are running Legends Club close to about 100 events per year. So obviously some of them bigger than others, but nonetheless we are constantly competing and constantly running these competitions. So, we haven't really talked a whole lot about the world of setting up competitions, whether it be from the course setup, to pin placements, to tee placements, to run the competition itself. That was a seminar we haven't seen in a while. So I mentioned it to Tom and ran it by Kyle, and they said that they were on board. So I'll tell you a quick story about how this seminar kind of came about. And the idea is that we're going to talk some about, we'll talk about a lot of things tournament setup related, but especially course setup related, and how we approach it from a club standpoint versus how Kyle and the Tennessee PGA Association attacks it from kind of a section standpoint, and then go all the way up to how the Korn Ferry Tour approaches these things from a professional level course setup standpoint. So I began, once we landed the Korn Ferry event over at Legends Club, there was a lot of discussion back and forth. We had the Korn Ferry guys, both the turf care guys that would come by, and Tom and I started having a lot of conversations. We were talking about, kind of what we had as a club, what they were looking for, and from our standpoint, we had some fears a little bit about working with the Korn Ferry Tour. I didn't know Tom, he didn't know me, and we were a little bit concerned about how the relationship was going to go, whether they thought our course was adequate to do a tournament that was going to be hosted on TV for these professional players who were so good. And at Legends Club, we have two golf courses. We have our South course and our North course. For those who have had a chance to play it, our South golf course is significantly more difficult than the North golf course. The North course has been typically a little bit more user-friendly for the members. A lot of courses that do have 36 holes have to differentiate a little bit. Our South golf course is a little bit more difficult, a few more force carries, a little tighter off the tee. And the North course, generally speaking, is one that's kind of like the member-friendly one that more of our older members and the guys that just want to have a fun round of golf go play. But when the Korn Ferry Tour came around and looked at the venue, they looked at the railroad tracks that separated several of our holes on the South course from the rest of the holes, and immediately said, okay, we're going to go do the North course. So they had no part of the South course whatsoever, and when it came to trying to get the patrons around, the tournament set up, ease of access and everything, we were going to the North course the entire time. So we had kind of been plotting and planning, along with our green superintendent at the time, Jared Keppel, about how we can make this golf course, the North golf course, as hard as we possibly could, because we were just scared to death. I mean, even some of our members were coming to us saying, hey, what's the final score going to be? Is somebody going to shoot 40 under par or whatever, right? So we're thinking, God, we got to make this thing tough so we don't get embarrassed out here. So we kind of had a plan of our golf course, the way that we have typically defended our course has been with green speeds. Legends is known for having good greens, usually fast greens, and for some of our club events, for example, during our club championship, we usually try to get the greens rolling over a 13 on the stent meter, usually 13, 13.5 kind of thing, or whatever. You know, we put a couple spooky pin placements out there, and everybody was like talking about it, going to their friends and whatnot. So about a week or two before the event, we didn't quite have where we wanted. I want to say they were rolling maybe like around a 12 or so, somewhere in that realm. And Tom came in town and he gave me a call, and he said, "Hey man, we got to talk about these green speeds, you know." And I was like, "I know they're not quite where we want them yet. You know, we think in another week we can get another foot out of them." And he says, "Man, you're crazy. These things are way too fast." I said, "What are you doing to us?" You know, and I said, "What do you mean? This is some of the best players in the world. We didn't want somebody just annihilating these things." So it brought up some fascinating conversations for me, for us, as far as the way that we had viewed our setup, like how we viewed our competition versus how they did it on the Corn Ferry Tour level. Kyle was involved with the event quite a bit, so we were able to talk about quite a bit of these tournament setup, course strategies, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to hand it off to Mr. Hearn. He's come up with a fantastic slide, and Kyle and I was just kind of chipping in, whatever. But we're going to do a good presentation here. If anybody has any questions for us, we'd love to hear them.
So do you still have concerns then? You said you had concerns.
I'm always concerned.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me. Yeah, it's always an interesting process going to facilities around the country and actually around the world. Just got back to Panama last week. Mike is correct. When we go to a facility, there's oftentimes a big fear that we're going to come in there and things aren't going to be hard enough, and worry about the ending result, and being embarrassed with the difficulty of the golf course. And that's part of what I'm going to touch on. We don't necessarily worry about that, where you're going to present the best product, the fairest product, and we're going to find a champion, and it might be 1200 par, it might be 2500 par, and that's part of my presentation. We really don't care. We're going to try to set it up as hard as we can, but we're going to stay with a fair setup. So, first off, many of you might know, many of you might not. We have a setup official assigned every week, one for the front nine, one for the back nine. It's pretty much in charge of that nine. Hole locations, tee placements, gives a lot of feedback about green speed. I happen to be the advance official for the Corn Ferry event here at Simmons Bank Open. And my job is I come in, he's stuck with me for 2 whole weeks, so I come in a full week, I mark the golf course, and I work on everything A to Z. I'm almost like an event planner. But working with our agronomist, he was on site for 2 weeks, and we all come up with a plan about course setup. So course setup is important enough that it's actually in our regs. I don't know, I don't see Scott Stallings in here, but I saw him earlier. He might actually learn some stuff, even though he's been on tour for all this year. We actually have a section on course setup, and I'll let you read that just to kind of give you a little bit of an idea of that's a part of what it says in there, but gives you an idea of how important we feel like that is to our mission, and we're trying to identify the best players in the world to send them on to the PGA Tour and compete at an even higher level. Where I'm from in Nebraska, I probably have to leave this up in another couple minutes, but I think y'all will probably done so. Now, I'm a PGA member. I have been since 1995, so very cool. I tell Mike it's amazing how many people I know coming to an event like this, because like Mike said, golf is a very small world. I can't believe I don't have as many people here as Don did for his. So, just a few things we consider, some pretty obvious, but the hole type. I mean, here's a 642-yard par 5 with a long carry to get to the fairway. So this is all stuff we're looking at. Wind this is just a good example. Scenario one, this is actually the third green at Vanderbilt Legends Club. And this is the type of thing that the course setup official that's picking the hole locations, the tees, thinks about. You know, if we've got a little bit of wind into that's not too bad, it's still not going to be terribly tough, but it's going to make that front left hole location a lot more accessible. We might tuck it in there a lot more. I mean, if it's blowing downwind and the greens are firm, we're going to have to back off on that hole location just to make it reasonable to get somewhat close to that hole location. Here on the other side of the green, same thing. Soft greens versus firm greens might affect the number a little bit. This is the second green, and this will give you a good example of why we don't want 13 or 13 and a half. I mean, that green is very limited as it is, and we wind up using, you know, the first day and the fourth day, a very similar spot, because really that's all that green has to offer. And we do use a slope meter. Sometimes there's a 1.3 shown up there, just to try to get a feel for where's the best spot in that particular area. But more than likely, we're hitting putts more than anything. This is bad course setup, in case you haven't seen this. We try to avoid this. Yeah, that's not good. And it's getting worse. Don't do that to your members or anybody. That's not. I think that was in Iowa, if I remember right. I'm sorry, some of you all probably seen this video. So sometimes we have bad turf on certain greens. We have to avoid certain locations. So we don't necessarily go back to the same hole locations every year, because a really good hole location might not be accessible one year because of poor turf conditions. We don't have that at your place, but it does happen. Variety, this is number 6 at Vandy Legends, and we're trying to give them a variety. So we're not necessarily trying to make it as hard as we can every day. We're trying to give them variety and make it hard throughout the week. So this is going to be a good example of how we move the hole location around, just to give it variety. This chart over here is a good example of how the setup official might go about ensuring that you've got some variety. Back hole locations, front hole locations, left and right. Just don't want to get a day where you've got 7 out of 9 hole locations all on the left side. Fan experience comes into it sometimes. This is 17 at Wichita with our event. It's kind of our 16 at Phoenix type of golf hole. And depending on, they might have giveaways on certain days. They might want an easy hole location. Another sponsor might not want as many giveaways. So that all comes into effect. The sponsor that doesn't only, might only want to give away, 1,000 free hamburgers. We might tuck the pin there where that red flag is. If we've got a sponsor that says the more the merrier, then we might throw it down there in the bowl and have some fun.
Tom, hang on a second. So when we were talking about the pin placements a little bit, one conversation that came up amongst our group is, from the club level, when we're trying to look at how we're using our pin placements, we kind of have to say, like, what is our goal for today? Like, what are we trying to do? So, for example, our men's member guest event that we do, we need that circle to get going. We need them to get moving. So sometimes we'll do an occasional pin that gives them something to talk about a little bit, but otherwise we're going with some of the easiest pin placements that we can possibly get, because that's more about the matches and kind of the fanfare than it is about the competition itself. Whereas if we're doing, for example, our club championship, which is a little bit more competitive event, then we might, and we do, you guys have probably heard about like 6, 6, and 6. To have 6 relatively easy pin placements, 6 modern pin placements, and 6 difficult pin placements. I would say that the majority of our tournaments, we subscribe somewhat to that theory. With the ones that are that have larger fields that we need to get moving, we go more towards a much easier setup. And it might be that 10 to 12 are pretty darn easy and whatnot. We don't put too many hard ones out there. And the ones that are hard are really only hard visually, not actually that hard of a spot to put on the green. Kyle, from a section standpoint, when you guys are either setting the pictures yourself or asked to golf. What are you guys intending to do for more of like the, the section championship or, pro or those kind of, what are you trying to do with your pin placements?
Yeah, it just all depends on what the event is. I mean, for us, if it's a section championship, professional championship, we're trying to make that golf course not the most difficult, but the most, what's gonna challenge all the skills of all the players. But also, we have to keep in mind, not everybody's at the top of the game, and we also want people still to come play, to keep our numbers up, and get that qualifying number up, so they can go play in the professional championship. So we don't wanna go beat them up out there. So it's trying to manage that and kind of give them a good mix of everything. And then when we go, a lot of times with our pro-ams, with a lot of our players that are in here right now, it's more accessible because we're trying to get you around the golf course. When we get the Harold Eller out there and we're trying to beat the weather and then beat 180 players out there and trying to get you all in, I can't tuck ball on you and make it most difficult. So it's a lot of that, just judging what we have in front of us, and what the play, and a lot of it, like, it's managing the expectations of what the player thinks what this event should be. Whether it's our professional championship, we want the best player, our best champions to come out, and and so the pin placement or the whole location and the tee selection, can determine.
I can attest, I was the tournament director for the Nebraska PGA for 8 years, and the section professional championship, I think it's the hardest event to set up for. What we do, we're trying to make it hard, and we're not worried about hurting their feelings but the section championship, you've got such a wide variety of ability levels, and what people are looking for that event. It's tough. I mean, you're not going to make everybody happy with however you set it up, and I'm sure you can attest to that.
Try to make those good. Yeah, it's always gonna sell out. It's fine.
All right. So going back to the other slide there, rain in the forecast. We had a lot of rain in the forecast this past year. It didn't pan out. Luckily, we got it in. But there's times where we've got a rain event coming that we know we're probably going to be able to play through because it won't be a lightning event, and we might be getting half to an inch of rain, and depending on the greens rain, we might try to avoid the low spots. It's just another aspect of what we look at when we're setting up. So, Tuesday, we're kind of coming up with a game plan of that chart that I showed you over here that gives you an idea of where we're going to go. That's all something that we're thinking about. If we've got rain in the forecast, we might want to save some high hole locations for that day so we can try to keep playing golf without pulling around the hole. And then the TV networks will oftentimes have a request, whether it be a camera angle, or I've seen it where there's been a tree limb that hangs down and they don't want that, corner hole location on a certain day. You'd be amazed how much TV will come and say, can you avoid this hole location on this day? Sometimes it has to do with shadows, and so. And then tradition, 17 at the Players Championship, it's always going to be there on Sunday. And some days, there's events where we have Panama, really all of our early season events, we have a hard time finishing Thursday and Friday and making the cut Friday afternoon. So if we know that there's a chance we might finish Friday, I set up in Panama 2 weeks ago, and I was trying to go a little softer on Friday setup in hopes that we had a chance to finish. We didn't, but that'll sometimes come into play because it's set up a little easier, you gotta play a little faster, and it's always nice to make the cut on time. All right, last thing here, just this, some of you might know this, but some might find this interesting. Some of the big myths that are floating around out there about how we set up, like we touched on, we don't use the same hole location every year. We will reference them sometimes, but we're basically starting with a clean slate every year. And a lot of that has to do with not only turf conditions, but it might be firmness, the greens might be different, the wind direction can play a big difference in where you can get hole locations where you can. We don't have a target score in mind. Like USGA, we're not afraid to have 2,500 shot at a really hard golf course, which happens sometimes. If the weather's good and the course conditions are good, I mean, they're some of the best players in the world, that's just going to happen. So we're not gonna get ridiculous with our setup just to keep a score at a certain level. That little slope meter, some people will ask me all the time when I'm setting up, well, what's the highest percentage you'll set a slope at? And it really can vary. I mean, if the greens are 10.5, you can get away with 3%. If the greens are 13 and there's a 2% slope and the wind's blowing 20 down that slope, you're in trouble with a 2% slope. So you really can't go by just the number. You gotta use, figure in all the factors to figure out what's acceptable. We don't have to be 4 paces or 3 paces to the edge. I mean, we could put it actually Knoxville back in Fox Den, not at your course, Chris, but we actually did a 2 from the left edge on 18 at Fox Den one year. And we've done it a couple times, but usually it's 3, but I mean, it was the front left for the Fox Den, very accessible, nothing there to protect it. It's flat as a pancake, so we threw a 2 at it one year. And we definitely don't save the hardest, best hole locations all for Sunday. If we saved all the hardest ones, it would play really, really, really hard. So we kind of mix it up every day.
So one thing, we were talking a little bit in the weeks leading up to this, and one thing that I want to point out is, you know, for those of you guys who are running tournaments or competing in tournaments, like I'm going to encourage you to start thinking a little bit more in depth about like how you're setting it up, and maybe even like getting more involved with your turf care guys and setting some of the pin placements. We've done stuff in some of our events. We try to keep the, like, so let's say for example that in our club championship that we're going to have the people play from our black tees, which is going to play at a certain distance, like right around 7,000 yards. We're going to try to keep that same general distance for the entire golf course, roughly the same. But then what we might do is on some of the holes where it doesn't really matter where we're teaming from, we might move the tee back on some of those holes a little bit to make it play a little bit more. So maybe as opposed to having a 9-iron to the green, they've got a 6-iron into the green, but then that gives us an opportunity on one of our other holes, like a par 3, for example. I might put the pin in a somewhat diabolical position, but then put them hitting off the ladies' tees, for example, or the forward tees, for example, right? To where a hole where ordinarily they'd be hitting a 6-iron or 7-iron into the green, well now they've got a sandwich in their hand, but the pin's at a spot that they've never seen it kind of before. So we try to do something at the 16th hole in our South Golf course. It's always been very vanilla, to be honest, kind of par 3, relatively narrow green, but otherwise not much defense to it. So our Vanderbilt golf teams, we're always discussing ways for them that we can make things more difficult. These guys are so good, and you know, they're always trying to make it longer, more difficult, or whatever. So the first thing that we did was we added a tee box that is around 215 yards. And if you put a front pin placement, from that distance, that's a really, really tough shot. You know, most of the kids on the team are having a difficult time even hitting the pin from there, you know, hitting the green from there, or whatever. So in our club championship, you know, one day hole number 16 might play 220 yards, and the very next day it might play 105, you know? So mixing it up like that really does add a little bit of flavor and to get people to look at their golf course a little bit differently than maybe they would view it kind of on a daily basis. So I encourage you to think about some of those things when you're looking at some of your you know, tournament setups, and not just kind of do the same old. You know, it gets boring for you, it's boring for the green superintendents, but it really gets boring for the players as well. I'll tell you one more quick funny story. So when we were talking about the green speeds, and when Tom was explaining to me that if we got into the green speeds that we were kind of striving to achieve, that they could never use some of the pin placement that they wanted to use. So hole number 3, the par 3 that kind of goes over the water, and I can't, maybe it was the first or second day, but they put a pin so far to the left, I have never seen a pin where these guys put a pin on that day. And I was like, can you do this? Like, is that okay to put a pin like that far left or whatever? So then we went out there to go watch, and in my mind, all of these players would obviously be playing 25 feet to the right of that, just going for an easy 2-putt. And these Corn Ferry Tour players, they were just going absolutely right at that pin. It looked like it was sitting in the water, you know? And I was like, this pin placement is genius. This was absolutely genius because it kind of baits you into it. and only a silly person would hit at it. There was a whole lot of silly people in the field that day because we spent delays for the first, I can't remember how long, dealing with water balls on hole number 2 and 3 with pins, people going at these ridiculous pin placements that we were using. So once the tournament started, one of my main goals, because obviously I kind of handed it off to them once we got past the programs that Kyle and I worked on Monday and Wednesday, is to kind of involve our members into the event. We had a lot of members that were volunteers for the event, but then myself and my staff, we would grab a group of members and walk around with them and watch the golfers and talk about the course setup. And let me tell you why we put the pin here, and can you believe they put the pin there, and all that kind of stuff, to kind of get them energized about the event as well. And I had one of my better playing groups that I was kind of showing around, and Tom was on number 18. I can't remember, it might have been the last. They were watching some people come in, and I brought a couple of the better players with me over to meet Tom, to greet them, and you know, kind of got I wanted to kind of fire the guys up a little bit, so I kind of see, well, you know, what y'all think about the green speeds this week, and did y'all see some of these pin placements and whatnot? And, I think that Tom might have asked him, said, so guys, what did y'all think about the green speeds this week? Do you remember what I told you? They said, man, these things are slow. We roll at 1.5 foot faster than this for our member guest tournament.
Yes. It was quite the controversy there for a while. But listen, it's not something that that was isolated to your golf course. We encounter that quite often, where the golf course wants to push the envelope with green speeds more than we do. But honestly, what we have found, what happens is, if you get the greens what we consider to be too fast, the hole locations start coming out from the edges, because you just can't get into little nooks and crannies like you can at a lower speed. So you wind up shooting yourself in the foot oftentimes. You think you're going to make it harder by having the greens light and fast. The hole locations start coming out away from the edges, down through the bottoms of bowls. And when that happens, our players can just shoot you up and spit it out. I don't care if the greens are 17. So there's a balance there of, yes, we want the greens hard and fast, but if you get them too fast, then like I said, the hole locations wind up being easier than they would